Good morning, church. Hope you are doing well. Way to go. Way to get up on time today. I know it's very hard. I'm very impressed. I thought we'd be even lower than we are right now. So this is a very good thing. Hey, let me begin with a big thank you. So last week we kicked off a new plan for the invitation time of our service, which in many ways is meant to give you more time with our shepherds. And that happened last week. And in both services, at the invitation time, we had members go pray with our shepherds. And one of them even told me there's no way I would have come forward in the middle of that spotlight to tell everybody what was going on, but I really needed to be pastored by an elder. And so we're really thankful that happened last week. And in addition to elders praying with members, it was quite a blessing to simply worship during the invitation song. Another member said there was one line from a song that we sung last week, The Goodness of God, and the line was, "Your goodness is running after me." And we sang that early in the service, and then the rest of the service, that's really what she thought about, even through my sermon. And then when we stood and sung after the sermon, that was the truth that God wanted her to know all week. So that time after the sermon when we sing is really important. So I just wanted to say thank you, because we're all in this together as we make this adjustment. Here's a summary of what this adjustment looks like. So there's some pictures just showing the heart of our shepherds from last week. And then here's a summary of the new plan. So first of all, if you can, we'd love you to stay during the invitation song so that you're not unintentionally distracting to someone who might be having a moment with the Lord. Shepherds are going to be in the back two atriums, and they will respond to anybody that has a prayer need. I'll be down front if anybody wants to get baptized. And then also teachers, volunteers, and parents that are picking up kids from Kingdom Kids. We have an extra song after the invitation song, and we'll do that each week. This will still give you time to get up and carry out your various responsibilities, because we are very aware that it takes a lot for a Sunday morning to happen, and a lot of that's because of your volunteering and the time and dedication that you spend for your classes and for kids and all sorts of things like that. So there's an extra song at the end of service. And also, please know this, that extra song is not adding time to the service. We're making adjustments in the first half of service so that our goal is still to get out about 9:25 to go to Bible class. So we're not trying to take extra time with this new plan. So overall, thank you very much for helping us with this, and thank you for being flexible. What do you think of when you think of a dechurched person? So somebody that used to go to church, but that is no longer the case. What's the first thing that comes to your mind? For me, I think of someone that's a little unhappy, grumpy. In fact, the first memory that always comes to my mind when I think of a dechurched person is several years ago, someone came to Memorial Road. They used to go to church. I don't know where they grew up. Must have had a negative experience. But they came here, I believe, once, and they were not happy. And I don't know what I preached that day, but I got a very, very long email, and it was unlike anything I'd ever read before. This person, he was so angry at just the church, Christians in the world. And so he said, Memorial Road, he's a big Star Wars fan, first of all. And so the email had the metaphor of Star Wars the whole time. So he said, Memorial Road is like the Empire in Star Wars, which is not a good thing. And who would that make me? Yeah, you guessed it, Darth Vader. So this is the first time in my life where someone has very vehemently addressed me in these terms. And it made me feel terrible, but it's been years ago, so it doesn't really bother me anymore. That's what I think of when I think of a dechurched person. Someone who's mad, angry, frustrated, something terrible happened to them, and now they just want everybody to know how terrible the church really is. Well, these two authors wrote a book last year called The Great Dechurching, Michael Anthony and Jim Davis. And they were trying to figure out, is that true of all people that leave church? We all have horror stories like that, but they wanted to understand this group of people. So they conducted the largest study that's ever been done on not unchurched people who have never gone to church, but this is a specific group, dechurched people that used to go, but now they no longer go. Did a huge study, surveyed 5,000 people, wrote a book about it. It's a super interesting book. So I want to tell you just one or two things that came from this study. But first of all, very brief history lesson that comes from this book. 1776, when the birth of this country, this really surprised me. Only 17% of citizens attended church regularly. That's a very low percentage. Now then, three things happened over the next 150, 200 years, which really changed things. You had the Second Great Awakening, and then you had the era after the Civil War and the era after World War II, both of which drove people to faith and spirituality. So those three shifts happened, and then we get to about 1960, 1970, and you have 2/3 of the country at this point is attending church. And then starts the reversal. And there's so many explanations for this. You've got the sexual revolution, you've got the digital revolution, you've got globalization, the digital age. There's so many factors, but the general trend since this time has been people have started to leave church. And so these authors wanted to know, at least for the people still alive, why did they leave? And what do they think? And what do they believe? And so they surveyed a bunch of these people. And so one of the things they found was, I found this really interesting, there are some people that are super angry and they write cruel emails and they don't like the church and they had something bad happen to them. They had a traumatic experience or they weren't welcomed or there was something taught that really was disruptive to them, and so they are angry. And the authors of this book, they call these the church casualties. Those that they're experiencing a lot of church trauma and church hurt. But what was surprising to me is that church casualties only represented 17% of people who have left church over the last 25 years. That was the sample size they're dealing with. Only 17%. So what this means is that the vast majority of people that leave church, they're not angry. And they don't send emails saying that the preacher is Darth Vader. And they don't write long posts decrying the hypocrisy of the church. And they don't go around saying like Marx did that religion is the opioid of the masses. That these aren't that group, most of them. In fact, the number one reason why people left church blew me away. I had to read it several times. I was so shocked. In fact, before I tell you this, if you have ever been nervous about sharing your faith, or if you've ever been apprehensive about inviting someone to church, or if you've ever been just a little bit, not ashamed, but just timid to tell someone else in your workplace or your school that you're a Christian because you're afraid of what they would say, hopefully this stat from this book will give you more confidence. The number one reason people put for why they left church was this: I moved. They moved cities. And they got to the new place. They've tried a few churches out, didn't really connect, couldn't find friends, and then life just took over and they got out of the habit. That's it. In fact, the authors of this book, they gave orthodoxy surveys and tests to these people, and what they found is that a lot of the people that have left church still score very high on what they're calling their orthodoxy scale, meaning that many people who have left church, they still believe in the Trinity, they still believe that Jesus is the Son of God, they still believe in the reliability of Scripture, they still believe that Jesus died for their sins. They just don't go to church anymore. And so what this means, all of what this means is that the popular narrative doesn't match the granular data. The popular narrative that you're going to see on TV and that you're going to see on clickbait news articles is that culture is against Christianity and everybody hates Jesus and everybody's leaving the church. That's not true of the data. When you survey the people, what you find is that the average de-church person in your life is not anti-faith, they're not anti-God, they're not anti-church, they're just busy. They just got out of the habit. And so this actually gives me a lot of hope. Like, I think a lot about people in our city. I think about people that used to go to church here. I think about some people that are really dear to me, that they've left church. Well, this gives me hope. Because it doesn't mean that they're super angry. It actually means that there's there's a chance that given the right circumstance, maybe they could find their way back to God. Maybe they could find their way back to church. I want to talk a little bit about a passage of Scripture that's very helpful on these fronts. Luke 24. I read a book called Sacred Fire about a year ago, and the author put forth that this story can serve as a paradigm for our cultural moment. So if you're unfamiliar with Scripture and you've never heard this story, I'll tell and read this story. And if you've read it before, I'm just going to refresh your memory. So you've got these two people, and they've gone to Jerusalem, and they're followers of Jesus, and they watch Jesus die. And this becomes a crisis of faith for these people because messiahs are not supposed to be crucified. They don't know how to interpret this new event. So Luke 24, verse 21, we had hoped, notice the past tense, that he was going to be the one to redeem Israel. So they're in crisis. They believed in Jesus. They followed him around. They watched him do miracles. That was great, but he's not supposed to die. And when he dies, that becomes a crisis of faith. All their hopes and dreams tied up in Jesus evaporated in a moment like a mist. Well, little did they know Jesus had risen from the dead, and he walks alongside them. So verse 15, as they talked and discussed these things with each other, Jesus himself came up and walked along with them, but they were kept from recognizing him. And so they walked several miles at night with Jesus by their side. They don't know it's Jesus. Jesus actually starts explaining from the Old Testament why the Messiah must suffer and die. But they don't know that it's Jesus. Verse 30. They're checking in for the night. It doesn't say that this is their home, but they find some place, some building, they're going to stay the night. And so verse 30, when he was, or they invite him into this place. And so verse 30, they sit down. When he was at the table with them, Jesus took bread, gave thanks, and broke it, and began to give it to them. Then their eyes were opened, and they recognized him, and he disappeared from their sight. They asked each other, were not our hearts burning within us while he talked with us on the road and opened the scriptures to us? They got up and returned at once to Jerusalem. So it's the middle of the night, 7 miles away, they go back to Jerusalem. And this is an amazing story, and it does serve in many ways as a paradigm for our cultural moment. In fact, here's 3 truths from the story that both apply to the story when it happened 2,000 years ago, but are so relevant for the situation we find ourselves in today. First truth is this: these people are walking away from a place of faith because something didn't seem quite right. So for these two people, they loved the Jesus that did miracles, but they couldn't grapple with the fact that this Messiah could die, and that really bothered them, and so they left. And Jerusalem, in some ways, was home base for the people of Israel and the Christians back then. It was the place where, obviously, the death and resurrection of Jesus happened. It became the place where the church was launched. It was the place where the temple was. And so if you wanted to go meet with God, you'd go to Jerusalem, and that's where they were, and then something happened there, and they're like, I don't know how to deal with this. And so I guess I'm just going to start walking away. And they do, and they're going to this place called Emmaus. It's the only time in the Bible it's mentioned. It doesn't say that they live there. So you can almost think about Emmaus as some vague place of shallow consolation or some place of escape. They're walking away from something that used to make sense to them, and now they're going somewhere so they can have some temporary comfort. This is our moment today. Do you know people like that? That they used to be in church, but then they started walking away because something didn't make sense to them. Well, I tried it, but I couldn't find friends. Or that spiritual leader said this thing, and it really bothered me. Or ever since I got my divorce, no one treated me the same way. Or I was just never the same person after the death of my loved one. Or I could never come to grips with how hateful certain Christians are. and I didn't want to be associated with them, so I just had to leave. Like that, people like that. It's something didn't make sense to them, and so they just walked away. Now, and where are these people going? I don't want to over-stereotype these people, but often when people walk away, they go to a vague philosophy of life somewhere in the realm of self-actualization. So, they go somewhere, and it's generally therapy and exercise and a good diet and a gym membership and book club, maybe yoga. Those are all good things. But they don't have the richness of this community that they left. And so this is true of both these cases. That people in Emmaus left because something didn't make sense, and then today, people often leave because something doesn't make sense. Here's a second truth. Jesus is still present to these people, even after they leave. So notice these people that leave Emmaus and they walk away, they're used to Jesus who would perform miracles. They're used to Jesus who would teach sermons. That's the traditional model. But Jesus breaks the traditional model. And he walks up to these people in the middle of the night, going nowhere. So Jesus is always present to people, even after they walk away. And this is true for our moment as well. Don't you know someone that they got mad or got frustrated or left for some reason? Maybe they just moved. And yet Jesus still manifested his presence in that person's life. Maybe not in a way that you would have prescribed or that you would have predicted, but Jesus never gave up on that person. And so maybe Jesus did come to that person in the form of some memory or a book that they read, or maybe it was some kind of a dream, or maybe it was sitting in silence, or maybe it was a song. But Jesus never gives up on people. And Jesus, because of who he is, he has the capacity to work outside traditional models. Here's a third truth that applies both to their world and our world. The return happened in stages. So it didn't happen all at once. So the first thing that happens is they're walking away, they're disillusioned, they don't really believe. We had hoped he was the one, but the implication is that they don't believe that anymore. So they're walking away, and the first thing that happens is Jesus comes alongside them. They don't recognize him. He has a Bible study with them. Luke 24 says that he opens up the Old Testament and explains to them this is why the Messiah had to suffer and then die and then rise from the dead. And you would think that if something could bring a person back to faith, it would be a Bible study with Jesus Christ. That's not what happened. That devotional from the Messiah led to seeds being planted, not life change immediately. Which to me that gives me a sigh of relief. We really can't force anybody to come to the Lord. We can't. We can just be faithful to the Lord and open up Scripture. We can't do the heavy lifting. So the first thing that happens is Jesus has this Bible study, nothing happens. And the second thing that happens is they all go into some house or home or some kind of lodging for the night, and they have a conversation. But again, even nothing happens there. Finally, when something happens is the moment when Jesus breaks bread. And then, their eyes are open. They realize, that was Jesus. He was with us the whole time. And then they do the thing that feels most natural. They get up and they return to Jerusalem. So you ever know anybody like this? They walk away, and you try so hard to bring them back, and you send them books and articles and sermons. You pray, you talk, and you listen. You so badly want them to come back, but it doesn't work. They read the article, they listen to the sermon, they say, okay, thanks. And it breaks your heart because there's nothing that you can do However, that doesn't mean that God's not still working on that person. It could mean that they're at stage 1 or 2 or 3, but it could be that they have to get to 4 or 5 or 6. And it could also be that you'll have nothing to do with stage 4, 5, or 6. For these two people on the road to Emmaus, this whole event happened in just a few hours, but for some of the people that we love and we know, this can take a long time. It can take a really long time. In fact, there might be some people in the room that you're not the one that's worried about someone walking away. There's some people in the room like you're the one that's discouraged. And you're the one that's not quite sure what you think or believe anymore. And so if I could just say just a word or two to those of you that you find yourself in that boat, the first thing I would want to say to you is that when Jesus died and rose from the dead, he offered a kind of pattern for life that many of us will go through. In fact, there's a lot of passages in the New Testament that talk about that we participate in the death and resurrection of Jesus. Galatians 2:20, Romans 6, it becomes a pattern for life. We die, we rise. Sometimes this can even happen to your faith. It goes through this rhythm, this cycle. So what this means is don't be surprised if you have a season of your life where you feel discouraged by God or disappointed by God's people or disillusioned by Christians who would profess to believe in Jesus and yet treat other people so badly. You will likely go through a season where you get really frustrated about all of those things. And that might be what you're going through right now, but if you are going through that right now, I would encourage you to also take a deep breath and ask yourself, where is the presence of Jesus in my life right now? Because Jesus will not give up on you. You might walk away from Christ. Christ will never walk away from you. And so my prayer for you, if this is what you're going through right now, is that you'll have some awakening, and I don't know what it'll come from. Maybe it'll be a sermon. Maybe it'll be a time that you just take a walk with God and be honest with him. I don't know what it's going to be, but I hope you have an awakening with God. And then when that happens, here's what I really pray for you. I pray that you feel that heartburn, like, he's been with me the whole time. And even though I rejected him, he never rejected me. In fact, he walked with me. He suffered with me. He died for me. He loves me. I hope you have that heartburn moment, just like those two people on the road to Emmaus. And then secondly, I hope that when you have this awakening, it will dawn on you just how infinite and everlasting the love of God actually is. Like we talk about it, we sing about it, but every once in a while we have to have an experience in our life that actually lets it sink down very deeply. Oh, God is love, as John says. So I hope you have that experience. And then the third thing I hope and I pray for you is that if you find yourself walking away, but then you recognize that Jesus is with you, I hope and I pray that you do the most natural thing possible when you recognize that Jesus is with you, which is this: it's to return to his bride. That's what those people did. They walked away. They encountered Jesus in the place that they never thought they would see him, and the most natural thing to do was to come back to the bride of Christ. I titled this sermon Prodigal Hope because I do think there's a lot of hope. We live in an era where it's really easy to get discouraged, but I just think God is above that, and he knows the person that you love deeper than you know that person, and he's got that person, and so you can trust him. We can have prodigal hope because we serve a prodigal God. Prodigal just means different and unique, and this is the God that we serve, so I do think that we can have hope. So, what can we do? Let me give you one very practical thing. 3 weeks from today is Easter. 5 weekends from this weekend is our weekend with Philip Yancey, where he'll come to be with us and talk about the question, what good is God? So here's what you can do. You can invite someone. So in all the research that the authors did in that book, The Great Dechurching, one of the things they asked all these thousands of people who had left church was this: would you come back? And the majority said, yes, of course I would come back. And then the sub question was, what would it take for you to come back? And the number one answer was, if someone would invite me. People are looking for connection and belonging. And you have people in your life that you might not even know it, but they just want a place to belong to. All it takes is you inviting them. And so we want to equip you today specifically with a few tools that you can use to invite people to our Philip Yancey event. So one is, I want to tell you just a minute about this digital invitation kit. So you can get online and you can access all this material. First of all, we have a very short video from Dr. Yancey himself. And if you go ahead and play that video.
Hi, I'm Philip Yancey, and I'm a writer. For some reason, I've always been attracted to the most challenging questions. The first book I wrote was a book called Where is God When It Hurts? I wrote another book called Prayer, Does It Make Any Difference? I wrote a book called Disappointment with God. What happens when God doesn't come through in the way that we want on something we really care about? Or when the church doesn't come through. We could all tell stories there. I hope you join me on April 13th at Memorial Road Church of Christ as we explore those questions together.
So you can access that video at mrcc.org/Yancey, or you can get that on the app. And what you can do is, we'd love you to get the video from Dr. Yancey, or 6 of our members have actually recorded invitation videos just directly to someone that might want to come. Hey, come check out Dr. Yancey at Memorial Road on April 13th. You can grab one of those and just put that on your social media feed. We really want to get the word out to the community about this event. You can also pick up hard copies of, if you want to give someone something physical, we have magnets with the date and the title of the event. So grab one of those. Those are at all our normal pickup points. So take advantage of this digitally, take advantage of the physical copy, and just think about who in your life would you want to invite? Like, who would that be? One other feature of this I want to talk about just for a minute is Dr. Yancey, when he comes, is going to do a lot of Q&A, because we want him to speak into questions that our community is really asking. So what I would encourage you to do is, when you invite someone, let the Q&A drive that conversation. Meaning, you could say to someone, hey, Dr. Yancey, one of the most world-renowned authors on the question of pain and suffering, is coming to my church family on Saturday, April 13th. He really wants to answer questions from people in the community. Do you have a question you'd like to ask Dr. Yancey? And then use that as a way to invite people to the event. So you can submit questions online, mrcc.org/question, and deadline for that's April 7th. But a lot of the content that he's going to bring, or at least some of it, is going to be directly answering or addressing questions that we have. So make note of all those resources. So we're about to sing again, and let me say one final word for those of you that have heartache about people who have walked away from church. First of all, I want you to know I share that heartache. There are people that I pray for regularly that will come back, that I hope will come back to the Lord. Here's 3 things you can do. Number 1, you can walk faithfully with God yourself. Number 2, you can pray that God would help that person have an encounter with the living Christ. And pray that that person would have the eyes to see it. And then finally, you can actively release control to the Lord. You are not in the driver's seat of this situation, and you have to practice the very difficult spiritual discipline of relinquishment. And we lift these people into the hands of the God who loves them and knows them better than we do. So we're going to sing a song now. And if you have something on your heart, some burden that you want someone to pray for you this morning, I'm going to encourage you to go to the back atriums, where we'll have shepherds there to meet you and pray with you. If you'd like to get baptized, I'll be down front to meet you and talk to you about that. Let's stand. Let's sing.